The noon sun hung like a brand over Dry Willow's single street, hard light pinning every board, nail, and shadow in place. Caleb Hart stood beside the hitching rail, with a letter folded so many times the paper had gone soft as cloth. He knew its words by heart: almond ink, careful hand, a promise of gentleness, and had spent a winter imagining the woman who wrote them stepping down with a shy smile and a travel-worn trunk. The stagecoach rattled in late and angry, iron tires ringing over stones, horses lathered white. It hissed to a stop in a sheet of dust that rolled forward and broke over Caleb's boots. He lifted his hat to see. The driver didn't climb down right away. He just stared at Caleb as if bracing him for a blow he couldn't soften. The door swung open. A young woman in a dove-gray dress appeared first. Blonde hair pinned neat, a small trunk hugged to her middle, eyes searching the platform like she'd practiced this exact moment. She looked at Caleb, looked at the letter in his hand, and hope moved across her face like light underwater. Then another woman stepped down behind her. Dark hair this time, same neat trunk, same paper packet tied with twine pressed to her chest. She blinked in the sun, found Caleb, and drew a careful breath of relief. Caleb's fingers tightened on the letter. A third woman followed, freckled, wind-burned, determined, a fourth with a veil to keep off the dust, a fifth whose gloved hand shook as her boots touched the street. By the sixth, Mrs. Baines from the Mercantile had come out to lean against her doorway, flour on her apron and calculation in her eyes. By the seventh, even the blacksmith stopped hammering. 8, 9, 10. They formed a narrow, uncertain line along the stage, 10 faces carrying the same practiced bravery, 10 small trunks set down in a staggered row like fence posts, and every one of them held a letter with Caleb's name on the outside, tied in the same twine, written in the same hand. The driver finally climbed down, hat in both hands, and didn't meet Caleb's eye. "I'm Caleb Hart," he managed, as if that explained anything. His voice sounded wrong in the bright air, too dry to carry. The first girl, dove-gray dress, took a half step forward. "Mr. Hart?" Her voice was careful, Eastern edges on the vowels. She held out her packet like an offering. "I'm Eleanor. We wrote," said the dark-haired one, quick, frightened, lifting an identical bundle. "I'm Ada. I'm Rose. Margaret. Lena." Names ran down the line like beads released from a string, each punctuated by the soft thud of another trunk nudged closer to his boots. Each packet's twine was tied with the same square knot. Each signature inside, when Caleb tore one open with clumsy fingers, matched the script he'd learned the winter it snowed through the roof. The same slant, the same gentle turns. But the names were different. Behind him the town gathered without deciding to, a hush thickening, the sort of silence that waits for the first wrong move. The driver cleared his throat. "Wasn't my doing," he said to the ground. "We changed teams in Cotton Bend. Agent there pressed tickets in my hand, said it was all arranged. 10 for Dry Willow, all to Mr. Hart. Said he'd wired ahead." He hadn't. A breeze lifted the dust and set it down again. Somewhere a fly buzzed against a window. Caleb read 3 lines in one letter, 3 lines in another, and felt the floor tilt inside his chest. The words were his words reflected back, phrases he'd used, promises he'd made, but the signatures differed as cleanly as separate graves. He looked up. 10 women looked back. "Which of you," he asked quietly, "wrote to me first?" They didn't speak, not because they didn't know, he realized, but because the question itself had been broken before it reached them. Far down the row, the smallest of the 10 lifted her chin. "Sir," she said, steady for everyone's sake, We were told the same thing. Passage paid. A safe home promised. Your name on every envelope. She tapped the twine with one fingertip. Same agent, same words. Caleb felt the town's gaze slide to him, as if he'd conjured this and was now expected to sort it. He folded his letter once more, carefully, to keep his hands from shaking. You've come a long way, he said, hearing the understatement scrape. You'll not be sent back into the heat. Relief moved the line, shoulders lowering by degrees, breath let out. The driver shifted, almost grateful. Mrs. Baines looked annoyed at the loss of a spectacle, and then, grudgingly, thoughtful about spare rooms and soup kettles. Caleb turned toward the wagon yard and his waiting team, counting beds in his head that didn't exist. 10 trunks, 10 letters, 10 lives anchored to his name by a twine knot someone else had tied. Somewhere behind the crowd, a telegraph key began its insect chatter. Caleb glanced at the office door, as if a wire might arrive with an explanation neat as ink. It wouldn't. He set his jaw and lifted the smallest trunk. Come on, he said, voice steady now because it had to be. We'll find shade first. Then we'll find out who stole our winter. Caleb's ranch sat 2 miles outside Dry Willow, a weathered cabin crouched against the endless sweep of yellow grass. Usually the place looked proud in its loneliness, a man's fortress against silence. But when he drove the wagon through the gate with 10 women crowded tight in the bed, it looked smaller than he had ever seen it. The porch sagged a little to the left. The roof carried scars from last winter's storms. A corral leaned under the weight of patched rails. Caleb felt those flaws in his bones as the wagon jolted to a stop. 10 pairs of eyes measured every board, every hinge, and he wished he had whitewashed, hammered, straightened, anything before this moment. Eleanor, the blonde in gray, climbed down first. She didn't wrinkle her nose. Instead, she set her trunk squarely on the porch and folded her hands, as if she were bracing herself to endure whatever this place demanded. Ada followed, dark hair falling loose from its pins, her gaze sharp, searching, not yet unkind. The others spilled down in a tide of skirts and dust, Rose's freckles catching the sun, Margaret's veil lifting in the wind, Lena clutching her packet of letters like a rosary. The cabin could hold 2, maybe 3 if you pushed. Inside, there was a single bed, a small loft, a table built for one. Caleb stood with his hat in hand, heat crawling up his neck. It isn't... He stopped. Words would only shrink the place further. The women didn't wait for permission. They filed inside one by one, their skirts brushing against the doorway, their trunks thumping down on the pine floor. Voices rose, overlapping. Practical questions about water, food, sleeping space. Margaret tried the loft ladder, declared it steady enough for 3. Rose swept dust from the hearth with her sleeve. Lena opened the cupboard and counted jars of beans and flour. Caleb followed, slow, like a guest in his own home. The air felt crowded, heavy with perfume, sweat, and the faint smell of travel dust. His table, once empty, now bore 10 packets of letters laid side by side. Each one bore his name, each in the same looping hand. He touched the nearest, and felt the rough twine bite his fingertip. They tricked us, Eleanor said finally, breaking the silence. Her voice carried calm resolve, the kind that steadies frightened cattle. 1 man writes, 10 of us answer, and someone pockets the money. We are not fools, but we were made into them. Ada's dark eyes fixed on Caleb. Did you know? Did you write to all of us? The room went still. 10 women waited. Caleb set his hat on the table, palms flat beside it. No, he said, the word plain, stripped of everything but truth. I wrote to 1. I don't know how it became 10. For a moment, the tension thinned. He hadn't deceived them. But the problem remained. 10 letters, 10 hopes, one rancher's life. The smallest of them, Lena, spoke softly from the hearth. Then we must decide what happens now. None of us can go back. The tickets were one way. The women shifted, shoulders brushing in the narrow room, eyes flicking between each other, between Caleb and the letters. Outside, the prairie wind rattled the loose boards of the corral like a drumbeat, counting down to a decision no one yet knew how to make. Caleb's gaze moved from one face to the next. He felt the weight of their journeys, their hunger for a place, the raw edge of betrayal. 10 lives pressed into his cabin, tied to his name, waiting for him to speak. He cleared his throat. "Tomorrow," he said, "we start with the telegraph. Someone's going to answer for this." But tonight, there was only one cabin, one table, and 10 women who refused to disappear back into the dust. The next morning broke hard and bright, the kind of light that made the land look merciless. Caleb hitched his team before the heat had fully settled, and the women crowded onto the wagon again, skirts brushing together, trunks left behind in the cabin like claims staked in wood and shadow. Dry Willow was awake when they rolled in. Men paused at the blacksmiths, women looked up from wash lines, and children trailed after, whispering and pointing. 10 women stepping off one wagon was not a sight anyone forgot. Caleb felt the stairs prick his back, but he kept his shoulders square, hands steady on the reins. The telegraph office smelled of dust, ink, and copper wire. Mr. Dugan, the operator, blinked when they all filed in behind Caleb, his spectacles fogging in the sudden rush of heat. "Mornin', Hart," he said, voice uncertain. His gaze darted past Caleb to the row of women, then back again. "What's this?" Caleb set one of the letters on the counter. "These came from back east, all different names but the same hand. They were sent through Cotton Bend Agency. I want to know who sent them." Dugan adjusted his glasses, squinting at the neat loops and curls of ink. He turned the page sideways, then upside down, as though a new angle might make it speak. "Strange," he muttered. "Looks like Mrs. Kavanaugh's hand. She writes the tickets for Cotton Bend, but—" He trailed off. "But what?" Ada pressed, voice sharp. Dugan tapped the seal. "This here ain't the Cotton Bend mark. It's forged." He pulled a ledger from under the counter, thumbing pages with a dry rasp. "Only one ticket bought east. Name was Hart. Paid cash. No record of 10. The room thickened with silence. Eleanor's jaw set. Rose clutched her packet tighter. Caleb felt his stomach drop, not with guilt this time, but with something worse. Fear. "Someone copied my letters," he said slowly. The words tasted like ash. "Sold them to 10 women. Promised them me." The operator closed the ledger with a soft thump. "Happens more than you'd like to think," he said quietly, eyes flicking to the women with something like pity. "Mail-order brides are business now. Business draws thieves." The women looked at each other, and Caleb saw something shift. Their anger wasn't just for the trick anymore. It was for the miles traveled, the homes abandoned, the years risked on promises written by a ghost. Margaret's veil trembled as she spoke. "So we were sold." No one argued. Outside, the town was still staring, the wagon waiting in the sun. 10 women stood in a crooked line inside the little office, the truth finally spoken between them. Caleb gathered the letters back into his hand, paper crinkling like dry leaves. He felt all their eyes on him again. This time, not with accusation, but with something heavier. Expectation. He slid the letters into his vest and said the only words he could manage. "Then you're not going anywhere. Not until we put this right." For the first time since stepping off the stage, Lena smiled, though faint as dawn. "Then we stay?" The telegraph key began clicking again, a sharp insect rhythm in the silence, spitting out news from somewhere far away. But for Caleb, for the women, the world had just narrowed to one truth. 10 strangers, one ranch, and a fraud that bound them tighter than vows ever could. Back at the ranch, the sun slid low, burning the prairie orange. Caleb's cabin groaned beneath the weight of 10 women trying to fit inside a space meant for one. The air filled with skirts rustling, boots scuffing, trunks dragged across the floorboards. Every corner was claimed before Caleb could speak. Eleanor took charge of the hearth, stacking kindling with steady hands. Ada opened jars in the cupboard and began rationing beans like a quartermaster. Rose found the tin cups and laid them on the table, counting aloud until her voice faltered at 9. "We'll need more," she whispered, cheeks pink. The table, scarred by years of Caleb's solitude, had room for 2 plates side by side. Tonight it bore 10. Plates overlapped, tin spoons clattered against one another, and still there wasn't enough space. Margaret suggested the women eat in shifts, but Ada shook her head. "We've come too far to sit apart now." So they crowded close, shoulders pressed tight, bowls balanced on knees, steam from the beans curling into the rafters. Caleb sat at the head, though it didn't feel like his table anymore. He had never eaten with so much noise, laughter bouncing off the walls, questions spilling one after another. "Where's the nearest church?" asked Rose. "Do coyotes come this close to the house?" Eleanor wanted to know. "How many cattle can this land truly hold?" Ada pressed, eyes sharp. Caleb answered as best he could, his voice carrying over the clamor, though part of him wondered if they were testing him, measuring what sort of man they had been bound to by fraud and chance. At one point, Lena pushed her bowl toward him. "You hardly ate," she said softly. Her eyes, large and dark, held no accusation, only quiet concern. Caleb picked up his spoon again, realizing his appetite had vanished somewhere between the clatter of 10 voices and the weight of their stares. After supper, space grew tighter still. Margaret spread a blanket in the loft, claiming room for 3. Ada and Eleanor argued gently about who would take the floor and who would squeeze into Caleb's narrow bed, until Caleb laid his bedroll by the door and ended the discussion. The cabin hummed with whispers as night drew in, 10 women breathing under one roof. Caleb lay awake on the hard floor, listening to the creak of boards, the sigh of someone turning over. He had lived alone for years, but tonight loneliness was impossible. What unsettled him most was not the noise, nor the lack of space, but the question that refused to leave him. Which of these 10 was the woman he had written to? And if the answer never came, could he live with what chance had delivered instead? By dawn, word had traveled faster than the wind. Dry Willow woke buzzing with gossip, and by the time Caleb hitched his wagon, neighbors were already walking the ridge, curious eyes turned toward his ranch. 10 women in prairie dresses spilling out of one cabin made a sight no settlement ignored. Mrs. Dugan from the mercantile was first to arrive, a basket of bread on her arm and questions sharper than needles. "So which one's yours, Caleb?" she asked, peering past his shoulder. The women stood clustered near the porch, their faces wary, skirts catching the breeze. Caleb cleared his throat. "They all are." He stopped, realizing how it sounded. A chuckle rippled from a group of boys lingering at the fence. Heat crept up his neck. "They all came by mistake," he finished, though the words did little to quiet the murmurs. Samuel Pryor, the cattleman from across the creek, leaned on the rail, chewing a stem of grass. "Never seen a man so lucky," he drawled. His gaze swept over the women with open hunger. "Maybe you don't need 10, Hart. I could help take 1 or 2 off your hands." Eleanor stiffened, her jaw tight. Ada's eyes narrowed, sparks of anger flashing. Caleb stepped forward, shoulders squared. "They're not stock to be traded," he said flatly. Silence followed, sharp as a blade. The crowd shifted uneasily. Willa, the smallest of the group, slipped her hand into Caleb's without a word. The gesture was simple, almost childlike, but it broke the tension. Caleb's chest tightened at the trust in her touch. Mrs. Dugan sniffed. 10 brides in one cabin. Folks will talk." "They already are," Caleb replied. His voice carried farther than he meant. By midday, the gawkers drifted back toward town, leaving behind dust and whispers that clung like burrs. The women retreated inside, their laughter brittle now, each glance at Caleb asking questions none dared voice. That night, as the lamp burned low, Caleb sat at the table with the stack of letters spread before him. Each sheet bore his name. Each told a story meant for one woman. And yet 10 faces haunted him in the flicker of the flame. If fate had tangled the wires so badly, could any truth be found among them? Or was his only choice to start again, not with one, but with all? Morning broke hot and merciless, the kind of day that tested cattle and men alike. Caleb woke to the sound of voices outside his window. 10 women already in the yard, skirts tied up, sleeves rolled, hair pinned against the heat. They weren't waiting for instruction. They were waiting to work. Ada had taken hold of the corral gate, inspecting the hinges with a critical eye. Eleanor carried buckets from the well, her arms steady despite the weight. Rose crouched in the vegetable patch, pulling weeds with brisk efficiency. Even Margaret, still draped in black, knelt in the dust, her hands raw from clearing stones. Caleb stepped outside, hat in hand, uneasy. He had expected them to stay inside, to let him manage the land as he always had. Instead, they moved like an army, each task claimed before he could speak. "You can't all stay here," he said finally, voice rough from sleep. "This place wasn't built for it." Eleanor straightened, wiping her brow. "Neither was the stagecoach built for 10, and yet here we are." Her tone was calm, but her eyes dared him to argue. He didn't. By noon, the ranch hummed with energy it had never known. Fences stood straighter, troughs fuller, weeds stripped from rows of beans that had been choking for weeks. Caleb found himself working beside them, hauling rails while Lena steadied posts, driving nails while Rose held boards firm. Once, he caught sight of Margaret pausing by the porch, her black veil lifted to sip water. For a moment their eyes met, and Caleb saw not mourning but determination etched deep. She gave a single nod before returning to the field. When the sun dipped low, the women gathered in the shade of the barn. Their hands were blistered, dresses stained, hair wild with dust, yet their faces shone with a fierce pride. Caleb looked at the land, transformed in a single day, and felt something he hadn't in years. Hope. But hope was dangerous. It made promises the world rarely kept. And as he watched 10 women sharing laughter that rang louder than the cicadas, Caleb knew the real trial had only begun. 1 man, 10 women, and a question that loomed larger than the sky. How long could such a balance hold before it broke? Dust rose on the road before anyone heard the hooves. By the time Caleb stepped off the porch, a rider in a brown coat and a tin star was already dismounting. Sheriff Albright. His face was set like granite, eyes sweeping over the crowded yard where 10 women stood in borrowed sunbonnets and work-worn skirts. "Morning, Hart," the sheriff said. His gaze lingered on the group, suspicion flickering. "Heard talk in town. Folks say you've got yourself quite a congregation." Caleb forced his voice steady. "They came by mistake. I didn't send for 10, just 1. Albright's eyes narrowed. Mistake or not, you've stirred trouble. Husbands are writing, asking after missing brides. Families are knocking on my door. And now I hear Marcus Crowe, the agent who brokered half these matches, has vanished with pockets full of money. A murmur swept through the women. Ada stiffened. Eleanor's hands curled into fists. Margaret muttered a curse under her breath. The sheriff continued. If these women were duped, they'll need shelter. Papers say your ranch belongs to you, but townsfolk don't take kindly to 10 unattached women living under one roof with a single man. Caleb's jaw tightened. What would you have me do? Throw them into the street? Albright studied him for a long moment, the silence stretching taut. No, he said finally. But don't think this ends here. I'll be back in a week. By then you'd best have a plan. He tipped his hat, mounted and rode off, leaving behind a trail of dust and unease. For a moment no one spoke. Then Lena whispered, If Crowe tricked us all, what happens now? Her voice trembled like glass. Caleb looked at their faces, tired, hopeful, defiant, and felt the weight settle heavier on his shoulders. The ranch, once a refuge of silence, was now the center of a storm bigger than any fence he could mend. And somewhere out there, a swindler held the key to 10 women's futures. That night the cabin was restless. 10 women under one roof made sleep scarce. Whispers carried through the dark, every sigh, every turn on the creaking floorboards. Caleb sat alone at the table, lamplight spilling over the stack of letters that had brought them all here. Each envelope bore his name, but as he opened them one by one, the truth unraveled. The handwriting was different on nearly every page. Ada's neat script, Rose's looping curls, Eleanor's sharp strokes. 10 voices, 10 promises, all addressed to him. But the words, they were the same. Whole sentences repeated across letters as if copied from a single page. A quiet man is all I seek. I long for a place where my heart may rest. Caleb read the phrases again and again until his stomach turned. Crowe, he muttered. The agent hadn't just lied, he'd forged. Behind him the floor creaked. Margaret stood in the doorway, veil cast aside, her face pale in the lamplight. You see it too, she said. He nodded, sliding the papers across the table. They were never meant for me. Not truly. Just bait on a hook. Margaret touched one letter, her fingers trembling. But the loneliness, that was ours. Each of us wrote something real. Crowe took it, twisted it, sold it like cattle. Caleb looked at her, at the weariness etched in her eyes, at the way she still stood tall despite it. 10 women tricked into the same fate, and him caught in the middle. Outside, a coyote's cry split the night. The women stirred in their beds. Caleb folded the letters into a single stack and tied them with string. The fraud was clear, but it didn't change the fact that 10 lives were now tied to his doorstep. And as Margaret's gaze lingered on him, steady and unflinching, Caleb realized the choice wasn't about contracts or letters anymore. It was about what kind of man he would be when morning came. The week crawled by under a sun that showed no mercy. Every day the women worked the ranch like it was their own. Fences mended, fields watered, meals cooked in shifts. Yet the tension thickened with each passing hour. 10 women under one roof meant 10 different wills, and no paper in the world could hold them together forever. It began with water. The well was running low, and Eleanor insisted the cattle be given priority. Rose snapped back that people couldn't work without drinking. Voices rose, sharp and raw. Within minutes, Ada joined in, siding with Eleanor, while Willa clung to Rose's hand, eyes wide with fear. Caleb stood in the doorway, jaw tight. He had seen men fight over less and draw blood. Now it was happening in his own yard. 10 women staring him down as if waiting for judgment. "Enough," he said finally, his voice carrying across the dust. "This land doesn't survive by fighting. We'll ration until the rains come." His words settled the argument, but not the storm behind their eyes. That night the cabin felt colder, laughter silenced, glances sharp as knives. Margaret approached him by the corral, her veil tucked away, her face drawn. "They're afraid," she said quietly. "Afraid you'll choose one of us and send the rest packing. Afraid of each other. Afraid of you." Caleb leaned on the rail, staring at the restless cattle. "I never asked for any of this, but I won't see them turned out like strays." Margaret studied him for a long moment. "Then you need to decide, Caleb, not which one to keep, but whether you'll carry all of us or let the world tear this apart." Her words cut deeper than she knew. For the first time, Caleb felt the true weight of 10 lives pressing against his own. It wasn't just a ranch anymore. It was a choice that would shape everything that followed. The sheriff returned at dawn, dust rising behind his horse like a warning. Caleb waited on the porch, hat pulled low, the women lined behind him in silence. 10 faces, 10 stories, all bound by the same cruel trick. Albright dismounted slow, his eyes sweeping over the yard. "Well, Hart, a week's passed. You got an answer for me?" Caleb's fingers curled around the porch rail. Every instinct told him to hand the women over, let the law scatter them back across the territory. But when he looked at them, Ada's steady jaw, Rose's trembling hands, Margaret's unflinching stare, he knew scattering meant ruin. They'd been fooled once. Cast adrift again, they wouldn't survive. "I've got an answer," Caleb said, voice low but sure. "They stay." The sheriff's brows rose. "All of them? That's no small burden." Caleb met his gaze without flinching. "Burden or not, this is their home now. My home too. If the law's got a problem, it can take it up with me." Behind him, he heard a soft intake of breath. Surprise, relief, maybe even gratitude. Margaret stepped forward, close enough that her shoulder brushed his. Rose clasped Willa's hand. Ada's chin lifted high. The sheriff studied the scene for a long moment, then exhaled slow through his nose. "You're a fool, Hart, but maybe the kind this land needs." He swung into his saddle and turned his horse. "Don't expect the town to make this easy. Folks will talk. Some will come with more than words." Caleb nodded once. "Let them." When the sheriff's dust faded into the horizon, the yard was quiet. 10 women stood in the rising sun, their futures uncertain, their place in the world still fragile. But for the first time since stepping off that wagon, they weren't alone. Caleb turned to them, hat in hand. "We start again. Together." And as the morning light spilled over the ranch, the impossible arrangement no longer looked like ruin. It looked like family, rough-hewn and unasked for, but strong enough to weather whatever came next.